Greetings, everyone. In this video, we're going to continue our investigation of categorical syllogisms. So last time, if you recall, we kind of got familiar with the basic ingredients of a categorical syllogism. And remember that a categorical syllogism is building with our four types of standard form categories. A, E, I, and O, right? These are the same, essentially, structurally speaking, types of sentence that we can see in a categorical syllogism. The difference now is that instead of a single sentence, we have two premises and a conclusion. So it's a three-part argument, and it's a deductive argument. So the conclusion is meant to follow from necessity from the premises. We then learned some of the ways in which we can carve up the categorical syllogism with, we came to understand that it essentially has three parts that repeat twice. We have a major term and a minor term and a middle term. The major term is the predicate of the conclusion. The minor term is the subject of the conclusion. And then we have a middle term that does not appear in the conclusion, but appears in both the major and the minor premise. So we're going to continue a little bit here in this video with our standard form for categorical syllogisms and have another look at mood and figure, and then do some practice identifying the mood and figure for some example syllogisms. I also want to discuss some of the rules and fallacies under the modern interpretation for syllogisms that will allow us to have a better understanding of which categorical syllogisms count as valid arguments and which do not count, which ones are invalid. Okay, so there are a set of rules and fallacies that our textbook elaborates in section E of chapter 6. And the first rule has to do with the middle term. So the rule suggests or demands that the middle term, right, the term that appears in both the major and the minor premise, the middle term has to be distributed in at least one premise. Okay, so we kind of already know this because of the definition of the middle term, but the fallacy here is said to be an undistributed middle. If you do not have a middle term in at least one of the premises, you have violated the first rule, and you know just immediately that the syllogism that you're working with is not valid. Okay, so these are kind of nifty rules because they give you sort of a set of red flags, as it were, in order to help you pick up which categorical syllogisms can't possibly be valid. If they pass through this sort of filter, they are valid. The second rule, don't mean to go too fast here, has to do with the distribution of the conclusion. If a term is distributed in the conclusion, then it has to be distributed in the premise. So to violate this rule is to commit the fallacy of an illicit major or an illicit minor. All right, so in other words, categorical syllogisms are valid when distributed conclusion terms occur at least in one premise. All right. We then have in Rule 3 a rule that says a categorical syllogism can't have two negative premises. All right, and the fallacy here is the fallacy of exclusive premises. So whenever we have a major and a minor premise with two negative premises, we know the argument can't possibly be valid. So that's a very nifty way of being able to quickly identify some invalid categorical syllogisms. All right, so Rule 1, 2, and 3 have to do with distribution and double negatives. Rule 4 suggests that a negative premise has to have a negative conclusion. So if we've got at least one premise in either the major or the minor parts of the syllogism that are negative, the conclusion has to be negative too. So the associated fallacy is an affirmative conclusion with a negative premise. All right, so be on the lookout for the appearance of a negative in our major or minor premise, and then the non-appearance of a negative in the conclusion. If you have that going on, you know your argument is invalid. The fifth rule is a negative conclusion must have a negative premise. So this is just kind of like a restatement of Rule 4. The fallacy is a negative conclusion slash affirmative premise, right? If it goes for the premise, it goes for the conclusion. Negativity suggests that if you have in the conclusion a negative statement, you need to have a negative statement in a premise. Rule 6 says two universal premises cannot have a particular, right? So if you have an A or an E in our first two premises, you can't then have an I or an O proposition in the conclusion. And the associated fallacy there is an existential fallacy because you're moving on the modern interpretation from the universal to the particular. And as we know from our discussion of existential import, the modern interpretation doesn't have this issue of assuming the existence of universal class terms. All right, so you can't make that move from universality to particularity on the modern interpretation. All right, so these are, just to be clear, useful rules for being able to identify invalidity in categorical syllogisms. I'm not asking that you memorize each one of these 6 rules, but I do think it is useful to kind of become more or less familiar with them in order to be able to flag down invalid syllogisms very quickly. Okay, so kind of have them ready in your textbook to flip back to as we're working on these practice sets. So let's do a little practice. I have some examples for you of categorical syllogisms where in this video I want you to just work through with me and try to locate the parts of the argument and the mood and the figure. So if we have an argument like this, some M are P, that's the major premise, and then we have a minor premise, all M are S, and then we have a conclusion, some S are P. Remember, if I ask you to identify the major and the minor terms, the major term has to be the predicate of the conclusion, and the minor term has to be the subject of the conclusion, minor. And then we have a middle term occurring, as I see it, in the major premise, in the subject position, and in the subject position of the minor premise. Okay, so if you go back to our chart in the Baronet textbook, you will see that figure 3 does have the middle term appearing in the subject position in both premises. So this is figure 3. Now, when I ask you what the mood is, all you have to do is for each sentence in the syllogism, identify the category of proposition. And you can see that this indeed is an I proposition with some MRP taking the form of a particular affirmative. The major premise is indeed a universal affirmative, an A proposition, all M are S. And then our conclusion takes the form again of an I proposition. It again repeats that structure of some S or P, which is the particular affirmative. So taken together, our mood and figure is IAI 3. Okay, so these are just some of the properties of this syllogism, and if you refer back to our chart, we can begin to also then identify its validity. Indeed, this is a valid argument. It passes through all of the 6 rules that we've just had a look at, and thus it appears on our chart. No violation or fallacy is committed here. So regardless of the content that might go into the structure of this argument, this works every single time. Formally speaking, in terms of the structure, this is a valid categorical syllogism. It is a valid deductive argument with a conclusion necessarily true from true premises. So what's very useful here is that we're able to substitute out any content in the universe, as it were, that conforms to this categorical structure. Okay. We are going to kind of move along here, not worry so much about ordinary language arguments for the moment. I just want to do some practice so that we are all on the same page. So for the following syllogisms, please identify the major, minor, and middle terms, and then go ahead, once you have that written down, and identify the mood and the figure of the syllogism. So try to do that for this argument. No animals are vegetarians. All bears are animals. Therefore, no bears are vegetarians. And note we have our horizontal line to indicate the break between the premises and the conclusion. So identify the major, minor, and middle terms, and then identify mood and figure. Okay, let's have a look at this. So note that our first premise is our major premise. So we know it has to contain our major term. And indeed, if we go down to our conclusion, we know that the major term has to be the predicate of the conclusion of that last sentence. So vegetarians, we know, is our major term. And indeed, that does map onto the major premise. We have vegetarians here in the predicate position of the major premise. And so then when we're talking about or trying to identify the minor term, we look at the minor premise or second premise. So we know that the minor term has to be included in the minor premise. We know that bears has to be the minor premise because it is the subject of the conclusion. Excuse my handwriting here, it's very difficult to work on the trackpad. And I do see bears here in this premise. So this is the minor premise, and we see the minor term occurring as the subject class term of the minor premise. Okay, so we've got minor term as bears, and major term is vegetarians. Now we have to think about what the middle term is. Remember, the middle term repeats in both the major and the minor premise, but it doesn't appear in the conclusion. The only term that I see that fits that criteria is animals. So we are going to circle animals. Oops, getting a little messy here. And we see that it occurs as the subject term of the major premise and the predicate term of the minor premise. So when we're looking at mood, we have to think about the category for each proposition. For the major premise, no animals are vegetarians sounds an awful lot like a universal negative to me. So I'm calling our major premise an E proposition. And then if we go down to our minor premise, all bears are animals, this looks an awful lot like a universal affirmative to me. This is therefore an A categorical type. And then if we go again now to the conclusion, no bears are vegetarians, again, I am hearing a universal negative again, another E proposition. So my mood is EA. E. And then if we try to identify the figure, you have to go back to your chart and look for the figure that has the middle term appearing in the subject position for the major premise and in the predicate position for the minor. If you check back on your chart, you will see that that has to be figure 1. So our mood is EA, E, and our figure is 1. So if you've gotten all of this, you've got it. You've been able to, in a sense, pick apart this syllogism and identify all of the different component elements that make it up. Let's do another one. Again, identify the major, minor, and middle terms, and then identify the mood and figure. Let's look at this argument. Some parents are college students. Some politicians are not college students. Therefore, some politicians are not parents. Identify the major, minor, and middle terms, and then identify mood and figure. Okay, again, let's talk major and minor terms. We know the major term has to be the predicate of the conclusion. So parents is major. And the minor term has to be the subject of the conclusion, politicians. And to find the the middle term, we have to identify the repeating term that's not in the conclusion. And the only option I see is college students. So we're going to circle college students, and we see that that middle term is occurring in the predicate position of both the major and the minor premises. Okay, so when we're identifying mood, we have to look at the category type for each sentence. First major premise, some parents are college students. This sounds a lot like a particular affirmative to me. This is an I claim. The minor premise, some politicians are not college students. This has to be an O, right? This is a particular negative because we have not. And then the conclusion, some politicians are not parents. This is another O claim. This is another particular negative. So IOO is our mood. And then if we're trying to identify our figure, you'll look over on our chart and we'll see that the only option for middle terms in the predicate position in both the major and minor premises is figure 2. So the mood is IOO and the figure is 2. So if you've got that, you have successfully picked apart this categorical syllogism. All right, let's do another one. Identify major, minor, and middle terms, and then identify mood and figure for this syllogism. No jet airplanes are quiet vehicles. All jet airplanes are fast machines. Therefore, no fast machines are quiet vehicles. Identify all of those parts once again. All right, let's pick this one apart. Quiet vehicles looks like our major term to me. It's in the predicate position. Fast machines looks like our minor term. It's in the subject position. So jet airplanes has to be our middle term, right? I'm going to circle jet airplanes. And kind of note that it is occurring in the subject position for both the major and the minor premise. All right, so let's try to identify the mood. The first sentence looks like an E claim to me, universal negative. No jet airplanes are quiet vehicles. The minor premise looks like an A claim to me, universal affirmative. All jet airplanes are fast machines. And then our conclusion looks like another E claim to me, a universal negative. No fast machines are quiet vehicles. So EAE is our mood. Now check our chart to see which figure has middle terms in the subject position, and that is figure 3. So EAE is our mood, and 3 is our figure. If you got that, You are on the right track. Okay, let's keep moving. Let's do another one. Same deal, major, minor, and middle terms, and then find mood and figure for this syllogism. No hot dogs are cholesterol-free foods. Some beef products are hot dogs. Therefore, some beef products are not cholesterol-free foods. Pick this one apart, identify the parts, and the mood and the figure. All right. Once again, major term is in our predicate position. Cholesterol-free foods is our middle term. Our major term. Remember, these class terms can be multiple words. Beef products is in our subject position, so this is our minor term. And I see as our middle term, hot dogs. I'm going to circle hot dogs, which appears in the subject position of the major premise and the predicate position of the minor premise. So if we're going to go through our categories to discover the mood, our first major premise looks like a E proposition, a universal negative. No hot dogs are cholesterol-free foods. Our minor premise looks like an I proposition to me. It's a particular affirmative. And then our conclusion, because we have a not, is an O proposition, right? Some S are not P. Some beef products are not cholesterol-free foods. And then our figure, we have to look at the figure that has the middle term in the subject and the predicate class positions, and we do see in our chart that that is figure 1. So mood is E-I-O, and the figure is 1. If you got that right, you've nailed it. You're getting this. And that is that. Let's move along and continue to reinforce this. Here's another example. Some cats are not independent creatures. Some cats are not lovable pets. Therefore, some lovable pets are not independent creatures. Find the major, minor, and middle terms, and then identify mood and figure. I'm going to move it along just a bit. You can probably see independent creatures is major. Lovable pets. This is our minor term. And so cats has to be our middle term, right? And cats is appearing in the subject position of both. When we look at mood, I see an O proposition in the first sentence. I see an O in the second, and then I see an O in the conclusion. O is our mood, and figure is 3. We have the middle term in the subject and the predicate position. Okay, so we can see how many different combinations you can generate with this stuff. Do one more. Identify the major, minor, and middle terms, as well as the mood and figure for this syllogism. All pastries are sweet treats. No sweet treats are nutritious products. Therefore, no nutritious products are pastries. Okay, let's have a look. Pastries looks like major to me. Nutritious products looks like minor. And so I can only conclude that sweet treats is our middle term, appearing twice in the predicate position of major premise and the subject position of the minor. This is our middle term. Okay, now when we're looking for mood, we break down each sentence. First sentence looks like an A, universal affirmative. Second minor premise looks like an E, universal negative. And the conclusion also looks like an E, another universal negative. The figure has middle terms, again, in the predicate and subject positions, respectively, and we know that that has to be figure 4. Okay, so make sure you can do this before moving on. Make sure you understand these different parts of a categorical syllogism. Make sure you're able to identify mood and figure. Okay, everyone? We are going to continue to work on this stuff, but make sure you have a handle on this component of it. Take care, and we will dive in further into the details next time.